come to a halt. On Tuesday, Donald Trump announced that the US will offer naval escorts and political risk insurance for tankers trying to get through. Here's Kulsum Sharif on the knock-on effects of the conflict.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps says the Strait of Hormuz is now closed. Now, this is an important waterway with about 20% of the world's oil consumption passing through this narrow curve. It's used by most of the major oil and gas producers in the Middle East. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is rather narrow but holds a lot of traffic. If we look at just this narrow point, it's about 33 kilometers, but an estimated 20 million barrels of oil have flowed through it every single day last year. Now, much of it is headed to Asia through the Arabian Sea, but some of it is also headed to Europe, right through the Arabian Sea and up through the Suez Canal. Its closure would mean 19 billion barrels of oil will be wiped off the global market. Now, Iran has been targeting energy infrastructure right across the region. It sent global oil and gas prices soaring. In its latest attack, it has hit an oil tank in a port in Oman. A drone struck it, but no casualties have been reported. Iran is also targeting Israel, and the Israeli military has reported interceptions in Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem, and El Beit. Israel, for its part, is targeting Tehran and Beirut. And overnight, the Israeli military has deployed additional forces to southern Lebanon.
Well, Sean Rain is the founder and managing director of China Market Research Group. He joins us from Shanghai. Thanks so much for with us here on Al Jazeera, Sean. First of all, what do you make of the markets? We've obviously seen a bit of a shock in Hong Kong, Sydney and Singapore. Are you surprised at all, first of all, that we've seen drops there?
Well, thank you for having me, and stay safe in Doha. Here in Shanghai, it's relatively safe, but all investors are on edge. They're worried about the stock market collapsing. You've seen in South Korea, the stocks dropped over 10%, their worst two-day showing since 2008 and the great financial crisis. Now, the reason, Tom, is largely because of oil. So 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, but Japan gets a full 97% of their oil goes through that strait. And about 20 to 30% of China's oil comes from Iran. So investors are really scared about escalating tensions and really scared about a higher price on oil. Gasoline prices have been around $60, $65 a barrel. We estimate if there's continued clashes with Iran and the United States and Israel, it could go up to $100. And the thing, Tom, is that means inflation. Inflation has already been a big problem around the world, not just in Asia, but in the United States and Europe. And so if gas prices do go up 30%, that's going to hit consumer spending, that's going to hit investment, and so equity investors need to be really cautious.
When you have the perfect response in your head, but your fingers just can't keep up. We've all been there. Typing, deleting, retyping. Now I use Whisperflow. I just think out loud and it creates perfect formatted text on any Apple website.
Bit because it seems that so far Iran isn't going to mobilize on land. It seems that so far that Iran, is able to shoot missiles into Qatar, into Israel, and to various countries, but it hasn't yet caused a lot of damage in terms of life. So there's fears that this is going to spread, but so far it's been fairly contained, and that's why Europe markets are, somewhat subdued right now. But if you look at it, the U.S. dollar has gone up in price because investors are going into safe havens. Gold is starting to rebound. It dipped a little bit in January because prices were too high, above $5,000. But I would still recommend to investors to be very cautious over the next several days. Buy the dip. That's what investors should be doing right now. So if Korea has a bad day tomorrow, it might be good to buy in at the bottom prices.
OK, obviously, part of Iran's strategy here is to create as much disruption to the global markets as possible, whether that's closing Qatar's LNG facilities or Saudi Arabia's refineries, shutting the Strait of Hormuz. What's the ongoing effect of that? Obviously, we've heard Donald Trump say that this could last for more than a month. So is that uncertainty, that long-term uncertainty, really going to hinder markets, you know, not just in the days ahead, but the weeks and potentially months ahead too?
Yeah, I'm worried about what's going to happen, not just weeks, but months, because even if there's an end to the immediate tension, you're going to see that Iran, I think, is going to launch terrorist attacks. They're going to launch missiles every so often. You know, at the end of the day, I think Trump misplayed and miscalculated what was going to happen in Iran. It was very easy for him to take out Maduro in Venezuela, and the vice president was willing to play ball and basically become a vassal of the United States. I think what Trump didn't understand was how religious the Shiites are in Iran. And so when you take out Khomeini, whether it's his son or whether it's someone else becomes the next Ayatollah supreme leader, they're going to be backed by religion. They're not going to back down that easily. They're going to be willing to become martyrs and die. So I think this tension is going to last a much longer period than a lot of people realize. That's number one, Tom. Number two, businesses just don't know where to invest right now. With the trade war still going, with Trump bullying Europe over Greenland, you know, companies want stability and they just don't know where to invest right now. Can you invest in China? Are there going to be tariffs? Can you invest in India? Can there be tariffs? So basically, at the end of the day, Tom, you have one man, Donald Trump, who's causing instability and havoc on the rest of the world. You, me, all of the audience are suffering economically because of this one man. You know, you see Japan in Q3 of last year was in a recession. Germany's in a recession. China's only growing about 4.5%, 5%. And even the United States, where Trump said was going to grow 3% in Q4 of last year, only came in at 1.2%. So if this tension continues, I am scared at a massive recession, just like 2008. And frankly, even though the European markets are in factoring that in, I think people need to be more nervous than they are right now.
Rain for us there in Shanghai. We're expected to face severe port congestion as the conflict in the Middle East intensifies. Hubs like Singapore are managing an overflow as vessels reroute around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. That's driving up shipping costs, as Patrick Fock reports from Singapore.
Now, the sight of lots of ships anchored here is common, but bottlenecks are beginning to build up around Singapore as shipping lines are requesting to stage Middle East-bound containers here. The increase in traffic is expected to cause significant delays, with some reports suggesting that waiting times for shipping berths could rise to as long as 7 days. Upended travel schedules is also causing what's known in the industry as vessel bunching, which reduces terminal efficiency and leads to higher costs. Now, we have seen similar sorts of situations before. Houthi attacks on US and Israeli flagged vessels in the Red Sea that began in 2023 caused similar prolonged conflict, could have a much bigger impact. The cost of hiring a supertanker to ship oil from the Middle East to China right now has risen to an all-time high of more than $400,000 a day. Marine insurers are also cancelling coverage for some vessels, forcing operators to seek policies at much higher premiums. This can add hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of this is expected to increase inflationary pressures worldwide as higher freight rates and insurance costs are passed down the supply chain. It also poses significant energy security risks for many East Asian countries that are heavily reliant on Middle Eastern crude. Analysts are warned that if the conflict spreads, maritime choke points could become more volatile, prolonging disruptions into the second half of this year. For key ports like Singapore, the challenge is maintaining efficiency and resilience in these uncertain times. Patrick Fock, Al Jazeera, Singapore.
A growing number of Filipinos in the Middle East are seeking to leave the region as the conflict escalates. People from the Philippines form the backbone of the workforce in many countries, particularly in the Gulf. Millions of migrant workers from the rest of Asia are also in harm's way. Barney has the story from Manila.
Manila's international airport may not be a hub, but it is the gateway for millions of Filipinos who are the lifeblood of the global workforce and the Philippine economy. Their annual remittances account for nearly 10% of the country's GDP. And about a quarter of them are in the Middle East, now caught in the widening conflict there. One of the first expats to be injured by retaliatory strikes by Iran was a Filipino worker in Kuwait's international airport. And one of the first killed was a Filipina caregiver in Israel who was assisting her ward to a bomb shelter when a shrapnel hit her. Now, her family has requested that her remains be brought back home, but officials here say that may not be possible for a while.
In due time, OFW Mary Ann will be home safely. But in the meantime, Admin PY and myself sent our teams already over to Pangasinan and for the family. And then our teams naman also in Tel Aviv are with hand-holding the husband through this difficult process.
In fact, no homecoming is expected at this airport anytime soon, at least from the Middle East. That much Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. admits, while also assuring the nearly 2.5 million Filipinos in the Middle East that there are teams on the ground already getting ready for eventual evacuation of those who've requested to be repatriated, and there is a growing number of them whenever that becomes possible.
Our assessment is that it would be too dangerous to travel. There are suggestions to evacuate by land, but that could also be risky because we're talking about an active combat zone. People could be caught in crossfires or cars could be bombed.
And it's not just Filipinos. Across the Middle East, there are more than 24 million migrant workers, many from South and Southeast Asia. And so, for instance, Pakistan, Thailand, and Indonesia have urged their citizens to shelter in place. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has directed all departments to assist Indian nationals. Vietnam and Nepal have suspended the deployment of workers, and here in the Philippines, a limited deployment ban remains in place. Barnabelow, Al Jazeera, Manila.
The history of US intervention in foreign countries suggests those operations often fail to meet their policy goals. Well, US President Donald Trump has said he expects the operation in Iran to be over in a matter of weeks, but can he achieve his goal? John Hendren has more from Washington.
The American bombs landing on Iranian soil follow a long history of US intervention abroad. President Donald Trump might have been encouraged by the January success of the mission to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
And they're going to make more money than they've ever made before. We'll help build their country again.
We have to make a judgment as to...
President John Kennedy learned the hard way that interventions can go badly and quickly wrong, as he explained after the failed attempt to overthrow Cuba in 1961.
Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan.
The U.S. has intervened in Latin America dozens of times before and after JFK's speech. Since then, more often than not, it wasn't the initial invasion where things went wrong. A lesson learned in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s, and more recently in Afghanistan and Iraq, where George W. Bush prematurely declared mission accomplished in 2003, with fighting dragging on for years after.
The lesson of U.S. interventions has often been that the power projected by the Pentagon often succeeds in leading to regime change. It's after that that things can get tricky.
In recent decades, historian Max Friedman has watched one American president after another fail to learn that lesson.
And the United States has demonstrated time and again that we have the military strength, we have the capacity to smash up states that we don't like or we don't like how they're governed. But then to build a replacement that will be on balance better for the people who live there, for the people in the wider region. That's a rarer case that we don't encounter and we don't seem to have a recipe for it.
Those remembered as successes were often the shortest. The U.S. invasion of Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989, and the first Gulf War in Kuwait in 1990.
Aggression is defeated, the war is over.
Put there by...
That might explain the time frame set for Iran by President Trump.
We projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
Time and tactics will reveal whether this war keeps to Trump's schedule and meets his goal of regime change. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, it is just gone 10 GMT. That is 12:30 p.m. in Tehran. You're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the conflicts between the US, Israel and Iran. I'm Tom McRae. Israel has carried out a new wave of attacks across Lebanon in its rapidly escalating conflict with Hezbollah. Over the past hour, Israel has struck multiple areas in Beirut's southern suburbs. It says a Hezbollah infrastructure. But a hotel near the capital and a residential complex in the east have also been hit. Tehran has come under intense Israeli bombardment also after the Israeli military announced a broad wave of attacks. Since Saturday, the US and Israeli attacks have killed more than 800 people. And Iran has launched multiple strikes on Israel, including in the Tel Aviv area. Israel's defense minister says whoever is picked to be Iran's next supreme leader will be, quote, a target for elimination. Iran is still carrying out attacks across the Gulf region. In Dubai, a drone strike hit the US consulate, sparking a fire. Saudi Arabia has confirmed there's been another attempted attack on its Ras Tanura oil refinery. And Kuwait says it's dealing with a wave of Iranian missiles and drones in its airspace. And in Washington, the Trump administration is under fire from Democrats. They say his justifications for attacking Iran are falling short. The White House officials briefed Congress in a bid to get politicians on board, though it's done little to convince senators right across the aisle that a war on Iran is necessary. Well, we are live in Tehran, Ramallah and Doha, but first we're going to head to Beirut and speak to Zaina Hodda, who is there. And Zaina, over the last, 3 or maybe even 4 hours now, there have been multiple strikes. Can you just talk us through exactly what's been hit, what damage has been inflicted?
Well, Israel continuing with its military offensive. This latest confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah is only escalating. The Israeli military also expanding and broadening the scope of its attacks. In the early hours of the morning, we saw 5 Israeli airstrikes come in, level 5, at least 5 residential buildings in Beirut's southern suburbs, the cluster of neighborhoods behind me. The Israeli military is saying that it is targeting infrastructure belonging to Hezbollah. Now, while those strikes came with prior warning, overnight Israel carried out strikes without warning, targeting a hotel in Hazmiyeh, that's a suburb of Beirut, outside the traditional strongholds of Hezbollah. So this is really putting more and more pressure on Hezbollah and on the Lebanese state, but Hezbollah also remaining defiant, continuing to claim a cross-border attack, saying that they are targeting military positions across the border.
And we're also keeping a very close eye on the south of the country too, Zaina. The Israeli army has been calling its actions there a tactical forward defence. But can you just explain what that actually means? What is happening there right now?
Well, the Israeli defense minister yesterday authorized the army to take control of additional positions inside Lebanon. I can confirm that the Israeli army has advanced at least a kilometer from 7 positions. So they've advanced into Lebanese territory from 7 positions along the border. Now, even though there's a ceasefire in place, the past 2 years, what we have been witnessing every now and then are these incursions into Lebanese territory. At times, the Israeli military abducts civilians. Other times, they detonate homes. But the timing of the latest incursion is raising concern because it comes just hours after the Israeli defense minister ordered the army to take control of more positions. Already, the Israeli army controls up to 10 square kilometers of territory. It is something that Hezbollah has been saying to the Lebanese state, if you're unable to push Israeli forces to withdraw back, back to south of the blue line, then how do you expect us to surrender our weapons? And this really has been a problem for the Lebanese state because the occupying these hilltop positions really is in violation of the ceasefire agreement. So there's pressure coming from the ground, from the skies, Israeli warplanes flying over Beirut, the constant sound of buzzing of Israeli drones, and their telephone threats. People in some neighborhoods in Beirut are receiving phone calls telling them to evacuate their buildings. So there's this chaos and a lot of tension and panic in Lebanon on where this conflict is heading.
Okay, thank you so much for all of that, Zainab, and hot for us there in Beirut. Well, staying with this aspect of the story, we're joined now by Anil Saeed, who is the of what it is like living under the threat and effect of these strikes from Israel.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for this opportunity. Of course, it is not a good situation. People are worried. Unfortunately, to say that we've lived through this before, and memory is still fresh. Not too long ago, less than 2 years, Lebanon and the Lebanese people went through this period of uncertainty, of waking up daily to sounds of course, either drones or explosions. And we are, as a government, mobilized. All ministries, all government agencies are mobilized. First, of course, at least at the level of my responsibility, is to provide shelter and food and supplies for the displaced people who are being displaced.
How big a project is that? Big. How many people are we talking about at this point in time?
Right. So we're actually still getting the numbers, but let me tell you what we officially have registered in the shelters are 65,000 people as of this morning. And this is about, they're being accommodated in some 350 shelters around the country. Now, there are more people, of course, displaced than those that are in the shelters. There are those that are still on the road, in the sense that they haven't decided whether they want to go in shelter. They still think they can go back to their homes, although we are, of course, encouraging them to shelter. So it's possible there is anywhere around maybe another 10, 20,000 that are somehow either on the road or have gone to their families and friends. And we are now in the process of registering them, so we will have more accurate counts. Now, in the last war, there was a much higher number. There were numbers talking about 1.2 million who were displaced in the first instance and the like. We're not, of course, there, and hopefully we will not reach that number.
Right. Obviously, this isn't going to be over anytime soon. From what we know from Donald Trump, he's saying it's going to last up to a month, if not longer. We heard from an Israeli military spokesperson just in the last hour saying that there's not going to be any let-up on Hezbollah in Lebanon. Can you just give us an idea of what your long-term plan is here?
Well, as a government, we took a decision 2 days ago in an emergency cabinet meeting, which basically said that all military activities of Hezbollah is illegal. It's outside of it's unlawful. And the army is fully deployed. All security forces are fully deployed. And of course, the long-term plan is establishing the authority of the state on all of its territories. Of course, we are also trying all diplomatic efforts. This is a key part of getting stability, getting the country back. Diplomatic path and asserting the position of the state, including the army, all across the territories.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. We really do appreciate your time. That is Haneen Saeed, the Lebanese Minister of Social Affairs, for us out of Beirut.
Thank you.
OK, we're going to go to Tehran now, where Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val has been standing by. And I understand there's been another Israeli wave of broad strikes, as it describes it, there in the capital. Can you just give us an idea of what, if anything, has happened in the last hour or so?
Yes, in the last hour or so, there has been what the Israelis call the 10th wave of attacks against Iran. Tehran has been at the center of that, but also Karaj and Isfahan, both east and west of the capital, Tehran. There are reports of 5 people killed, and there are also reports of schools being hit in these attacks. So that's basically what we have so far. We don't have clarity about the specific nature of targets. That's something that takes time. But also, on the other hand, Iran, the Revolutionary Guard, has announced overnight the 16th and the 17th waves of attacks in what they call the True Promise 4 operation. That's their name for their part of this war. And they talk about a wide range of targets in Israel, including the headquarters of the Zionists, as they call the Zionist Army, the Ministry of War in Hekira, in the strategic infrastructure in Beni Barak, the military targets in Beit Tekva, and the military center of Jalil al-Gharbi. And they talk about effective, efficient action in this regard and the possibility to reach those places and damage them. The IRGC also, contrary to what the Americans say about the complete destruction of the Iranian Navy, they said their Navy operations are still ongoing and that they are reaching targets, American targets, 600 kilometers deep in the Indian Ocean. They are talking about the continuation of that type of activities. Revolutionary Guard has said it has launched simultaneous operations, fired 230 offensive drones at U.S. targets in U.S. bases in Ali Salim in Kuwait and Arif Jan in Ali Salim in Kuwait and Arif Jan also in Kuwait. So they are talking about an endless amount of action and a long list of targets across the region, all showing that there is no baiting, there is no reduction of the firepower that is going out of Iran in terms of its reaction to this war.
Mohammed, we're also getting reports that the members of Iran's Assembly of Experts that have been tasked with choosing the new supreme leader say that they are close to a decision. Do you have any more information, and how soon could we hear?
Well, there is a lot of rumors and a lot of talk going around in social media here in the country, but there is no specific information. We have Ayatollah Mujtaba Hosseini. He's member of the Assembly of Experts. That's the highest source that has talked about it. And he said that there is yet no clear indication of how long the process will take, but the process is ongoing, and that once the preparations are finished, a new supreme leader will be elected. That takes, of course, voting. 2/3 of the 88 members of the Assembly of Experts voting on a new leader. If you want me to talk to you about the rumors, there are 2 names that are being circulated in the social media and so on, and that's Mujtaba Khamenei, son of the late supreme leader, and Hassan Rouhani, the former Iranian president. But these are just at the level of rumors so far, and there is no clarity with regards to that in terms of what the Iranian highest government members are saying.
OK, thank you so much, Mohammed, for all of that. Mohammed Val in Tehran. Well, Israel has just issued evacuation orders in Lebanon. Noor O'Day is in Ramallah for us with the latest. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you're learning regarding even more forced evacuation orders?
That's right, Tom. And these forced evacuation orders are quite dramatic. The Israeli army telling all the Lebanese residents of all of southern Lebanon, south of the leave now immediately, because they will. So the years to clear the southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, of all civilians. These forced evacuation orders has been the pattern in Israeli military conduct. Once these orders are issued, the Israeli army considers that those remaining in the areas will not be civilians, and as such would be fair targets. Now that just means and signals that the Israeli army does intend to move ground troops into southern Lebanon. But this is a large chunk of the country, a large chunk of the south that had been declared free of Hezbollah weapons by the Lebanese government. This a marked escalation, Tom. We're not just talking about bombardments from the air. We're not just talking about Israel going after Hezbollah. We're talking about ground invasion until the Litani River.
Which is a significant development. We've also heard from our correspondent in Tehran saying that Iran's working to pick a new supreme leader. Israel's defense minister says whoever is selected is going to be a target. Israel Katz saying on X, every leader appointed by the Iranian terror regime to continue and lead the plan to destroy Israel, to threaten the United States and the free world and the countries of the region, and to suppress the Iranian people will, quote, be an unequivocal target for elimination. He went on to say it does not matter what his name is or the place where he hides. Nor that is quite a remarkable statement there from Israel Katz, basically saying that we're going to hunt you down and get you regardless of who you are and regardless of international law.
Absolutely. And that is the framing, that is the selling point that Israel has been using, Tom, to justify this war against Iran. It wants to sell the idea that Iran, a sovereign country of more than 90 million people, is the same as a non-state actor, an armed group, an armed militia in Lebanon, Palestine, or elsewhere. And as such, it is dealing with the structure of government at the helm of government in Iran in the same manner. Now, this is important because there's a lot of doubt now being cast, especially in the U.S., which is crucial to the continuation of this war effort for Israel, about the reasons for the war, about the tactics of the war, and about the end game. There is widespread support in Israel for attacking Iran, but there are questions, real, credible, justifiable questions about the end game. You cannot bomb a regime change into a country from the skies. But Benjamin Netanyahu has been clear. He doesn't just want Iran, a government in Iran that is pro-Israel policies, willing to cooperate with it without question about its policies of occupation elsewhere in the region. We'll have to wait and see whether that can pan out from the skies.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Noor, as always. Noor O'Day for us there in Ramallah. Iran has attacked targets in the region for a fourth night. Saudi Arabia's defence ministry spokesman says there's been another attempted attack on its Ras Tanura oil refinery. It is one of several energy facilities Iran has targeted in the past few days. Now, on Monday, a drone strike there caused a fire. Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura is one of the world's largest oil refineries. In Dubai, a drone strike hit the US consulate. It caused a fire, but authorities say it was quickly contained. No injuries have been reported. We're going to go to Zain Basravi, who's in Doha for us. And Zain, if we can, first of all, if you can just update us, if possible, on Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia. What, if any, damage was done there?
Well, from what we understand, Saudi Arabia says that it intercepted a drone attack targeting this huge refinery, the largest one in the Middle East. The statement says Saudi Arabia intercepted a drone attack targeting its massive Ras Tanura refinery. The defense ministry said this followed an earlier hit on the complex that was just 2 days ago. It just sit on the Gulf Coast, so it's not that far across the water from Iran, and has been targeted twice so far in the last 5 days since the war began. The statement goes on to say initial estimates indicate that the attack was carried out by a drone and did not result in any damage. And that's according to a ministry statement. So it seems that they did intercept it before it was able to cause any damage to the refinery, unlike a few days ago when there was a fire and it had to be shut down.
And obviously it is not just that refinery. There have been many more attacks right across the Gulf region. I guess many of the countries taking stock of this latest round of attacks by Iran.
That's correct. Today, day 5 of the war. Of course, last night we went to bed after these 2 ballistic missiles once again targeted Qatar. We heard them at around 8 p.m. local time. One of them was intercepted, but one of them the ministry here did confirm, the Ministry of Defense confirmed it did strike Al Udeid Air Base. It took the Iranians about 4 days of trying to strike Al Udeid Air Base, where the CENTCOM, a U.S. CENTCOM, is headquartered, but they did manage to do it. Still no assessment of damage or details about the aftermath of that report, of that attack. But we also know earlier, just about an hour or so ago, the Kuwait Ministry of Defense said our armed forces are currently dealing with a batch of missiles and drones as well. So no let up in these ongoing attacks. Saudi Arabia earlier today said it hit a drone east of the country. That was after it shot down 2 ballistic missiles over the Al Khurj region. Now, this is where Prince Sultan Air Base is located, which has routinely hosted U.S. forces. And as these attacks carry on, we're hearing from the Foreign Ministry of Qatar when they are saying that these kinds of things simply threaten good faith and understanding, and the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs stressing the need for an immediate cessation of escalation and a return to the negotiating table. So despite these ongoing attacks, Qatar's government continues to say the same thing, that even though the violence is ongoing, this conflict will end at a negotiating table.
OK, thank you so much, Zain. As always, Zain Basravi for us there in Doha. Well, in Iraq, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it's launched a series of drone attacks targeting a US military base in Erbil. The IRGC says it was part of what it described as 3 simultaneous operations, including strikes on 2 US military bases in Kuwait. Also in Iraq, there's been an attack on the headquarters of the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan. The exiled group is blaming Iran for launching drones at their camp. Iran has designated Kurdish opposition groups as terrorist organisations. OK, well, Russell Surda joins us now. He's reported extensively from Iran. Can you just give us a sense of exactly what is going on here with Iraq? Can you just lay it out in really plain terms for people who might not know some of the history of that border region?
Indeed. So Iran is, when it comes to the ethnic and religious minorities, is an extremely diversified country. So we're talking about roughly around 93 million people in Iran. And then more than half of that population are made of the minorities. So we're talking about 8 to 9 million Kurds, around 4 million Arabs, and around 3 million Baluchs, and over 25 million of Azeris, there are Lurs, and many other ethnic groups. However, this ethnic tension mostly has been focused on 2 parts of Iran. One of them is Balochistan in the east of the country, and the other one is the Kurdish region of Iran in the western part of the country. And now that the IRGC, for the first time, saying that our ground forces were engaged in conducting the operations along the Iran-Iraqi border, was these Kurdish separatist groups are particularly stationed, is extremely important, because the main assessment, the risk assessment, one of the biggest risk that Tehran is seeing as for the coming weeks and months and potentially even years is that the US and Israel would like to destabilize Iran's borders and encourage these ethnic insurgency within Iran, starting particularly with the Kurds, arming them, and then leading an internal insurgency. And that could spread to Baluchs, then to Arabs, and eventually even to Azeris. And that could open the door for a civil war.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask about. I mean, how great is that risk? This destabilisation in the region will lead to something along those lines? Because that would be, I mean, obviously hugely significant, wouldn't it?
It mostly depends on how the central government is going to remain. So if Americans are up to an extremely weak central government that doesn't have the air forces, that doesn't have a meaningful military capacity, and that its economy is crashed, is paralyzed, and further isolated from the world, then the central government is going to struggle, having extreme difficulties of dealing with these ethnic insurgencies, with the remote areas. So if the central government is weak, how they are going to be able to control these minorities at the periphery of the country? So that's why it all depends how the central government is going to remain. But what we can see that as the
When creativity and AI merge, every gap is gracefully bridged. With AI Extend, those almost moments find their perfect continuation. Free-flowing trajectories unleash new sparks of creativity. Even text transforms, breathing life into your message. Data becomes rhythm. Charts become emotion. This is Wondershare Filmora, powered by AI. Edit as an expert.
process and find a successor.
It's very much important because what Iran has lost by the killing of Ali Khamenei is beyond imagination. So, four supreme leaders. The first one was Ayatollah Khomeini, who was a charismatic leader, and he was extremely popular, by the way. But when he became the supreme leader, just in a year, then a war erupted with Iraq, and it lasted 8 years. So he did not have the chance really to rebuild the state. But in '89, Ali Khamenei has been elected as the supreme leader, and he built the new Iran. So he is the builder and architect of the modern day Iran. All the institutions that you can imagine, all key figures that are running the country now, including the security, the economic bodies, and so on. So either has been shaped, appointed by Ali Khamenei, and now that guy is out of the picture. And Iranians, they have to be extremely quick to pick a leader that not to let the power vacuum to further destabilize the country. But one thing, as a final point, it is going to be the IRGC, the Iran's Revolutionary Guards, that are going to decide about who will be the country's next supreme leader. And I'm expecting it to come soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Ressel. We will talk to you, no doubt, in the coming hours as well. Ressel Serda for us there. Well, Shael Benafrim is a senior geopolitical analyst at Atlas Global Strategies and a former Israeli diplomat. He says the timing of the attacks against Iran is rooted in domestic politics in the US and Israel. He spoke to my colleague Sarah Harat a little earlier.
Netanyahu said that he's been trying to do this for 40 years. He doesn't hide it, and he's going to run on the elections probably pretty soon, saying that this was his great achievement if he manages to take out the Islamic Republic. The caveat is that the timing is somewhat convenient for Trump because of the Epstein scandal, and that's probably one of the reasons he agreed to go with it. Obviously, he had to say yes, but ultimately this is an Israeli initiative that has been going on for years to try to do this.
When you mention the Epstein files, you mean as a distraction away from that?
Yes. The current approval numbers for Trump are the worst they've ever been. Some of the worst this early in a term I can remember. and there's signs that the economy is going to get worse. So he really needs a distraction from that in the form of a war. And if you look at searches on Google for the Epstein files, they've plummeted since this started. So at least temporarily, it's succeeding. It's taking up Congress's time and it's taking up the media's time. So in that sense, it's also Trump's war. But it didn't have to be Iran. It could be something else as far as Trump's concerned.
That's interesting because, earlier today, Trump himself was saying that he might have forced Israel's hand into this war, sort of contradictory, if you like, what Marco Rubio had said. But look, if for any reason moving forward, the public increasingly puts pressure or even political pressure on Donald Trump to walk away from this or to de-escalate, what sort of leverage do you think the US could have or Trump could have on his ally, Benjamin Netanyahu, into persuading him, rather, to move away from that ambition when it comes to Iran?
The United States has over Israel theoretically is massive. All they would have to do is say that they're going to stop providing ammunition, that they're going to stop providing interceptors, theoretically in an abstract reality, that they could stop protecting them in the UN Security Council. There's so many things that Trump could do, but he's not going to do any of it. We don't exactly know why Netanyahu has this kind of hold over Trump. People thought that there'd be some independence that Trump would have from Netanyahu, but it's turned out to be quite the opposite. It's turned out that Netanyahu really controls Trump. And why did Trump say that? He said that because everyone is starting to look at Trump as sort of weak and easily influenced and easily led and a tool of Israel, especially in the right-wing circles that he takes very seriously.
Well, you're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. I'm Tom McRae. Israel has issued new evacuation orders for Lebanon in its rapidly escalating conflict with Hezbollah. Over the past couple of hours, Israel has struck multiple areas in Beirut's southern suburbs. It says a Hezbollah infrastructure. But a hotel near the capital and a residential complex in the east have also been hit. Tehran has come under intense bombardment after the Israeli military announced a broad wave of attacks. Since Saturday, the US and Israeli attacks have killed more than 800 people. And Iran has launched multiple strikes on Israel, including in the Tel Aviv area. Israel's defense minister says whoever is picked to be Iran's next supreme leader will be, quote, a target for elimination. Well, Iran has attacked targets in the Gulf region for a fourth day. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry spokesman says there's been another attempted attack on its Ras Tanura oil refinery. It's one of several energy facilities that Iran has targeted in the past few days. And in Dubai, a drone strike hit the US consulate, sparking a fire. And Kuwait says it's dealing with a wave of Iranian missiles and drones in its airspace. And in Washington, the Trump administration is under fire from Democrats. They say his justifications for attacking Iran are falling short. And the White House officials have briefed Congress in a bid to get politicians on board, but it's done little to convince Democratic senators that a war on Iran is necessary. The US president has said most of the officials Washington had considered potential new leaders of Iran have been killed. Now, Trump drew parallels with the operation in Venezuela, which ended with the capture of President Nicolas Maduro.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group. They may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody. But we have... Venezuela was so incredible because we did the attack and we kept government totally intact. And we have Delcy, who's been very good. We have the whole chain of command, and they've been, look, the relationship's been great. We've taken out 100 million barrels of oil already, and a big part of that goes to them, and a big part goes to us, and it's been great.
Well, to discuss all of this, we are joined now by several guests. Joining me in the studio is Zaidoun El-Kanani, a Middle East politics lecturer at Georgetown University in Qatar. In Tehran is Abbas Aslani, a senior research fellow at the Centre for Middle East Strategic Studies. And in Vienna is Wolfgang Pusztai, a security policy and defence analyst. Thank you all very much for joining us. First, Abbas, I'm sure you were listening into what we just played from Donald Trump there, almost admitting that they don't know who at this point could potentially take over the supreme leadership there in Iran. How worrying is that from your perspective?
Well, the Iranian Assembly of Experts is trying to vote on the new leader, and they have been making consultations. However, convening in person is risky for them, and because, as it was stated by a member of the Assembly of Experts, it's war condition, so that's why there has been quite a delay of few days. But they will be trying to elect a new leader as soon as possible. But, the risk from the American and Israeli side exists, but there is a vacuum to fill in the country because the country has lost a leader who sat at the top of the hierarchy, and also high-ranking commanders were lost. So they need to compensate this situation in order to make sure that there is no political vacuum in the country. However, there is an interim leadership council in charge at the moment to lead the country through this transitional period. And this is quite a challenging time that the country needs to navigate through. And these, let's say, conflicting situation has made it a bit more difficult.
Okay, Wolfgang, do you agree with that assessment that there's a vacuum there in Iranian leadership at this point in time? And what does that mean? Because we've talked to some analysts and Iranian experts that say that the IRGC is actually the ones that are in control in terms of the military and what it's doing and who it's striking and its targets right now, and will effectively decide who next leads the country too.
I would say Khamenei was certainly very powerful, a very influential, a very strong person. Nevertheless, there is always someone here to replace him. There is always a deputy, and the Iranian constitution always foresees a process to replace the leader. So this means the next person that will probably take over won't be as strong, won't be as powerful, won't be as influential as Khamenei was. With regard to the military structures, you can expect that those who were in charge were the best ones suited for the job. The deputies won't be fully up to the task. And if they are again killed, if the new leader is again killed, the weakness of the Iranian political and military command and control system will be even more evident.
Zaidoun, what do you make of all of this? I mean, as we heard Wolfgang say there, that whoever takes over next in Iran is not going to be as strong or as influential. What are the consequences of that?
Well, it also reflects the internal dynamics. We have different political divisions within Iran domestically. We have the variety of the different political opinions within the country, most significantly the opposition, which also has a variety of different opinions. But we also have the intra-elitist divisions, which we have noticed sometimes between the ruling elite, the supreme leader, the IRGC, the Basij, and even including a lot of different opinions between the religious establishment in Qum and the government in Tehran. However, the assassination of Khamenei, the former supreme leader, and the way he was assassinated in a very symbolic move by the US and the Israeli coordinated strikes indicates that this is definitely a major downfall in the symbolic power that has been presented by the Islamic Revolution or the Islamic Republic of Iran since 1979, which means there is a very strong possibility that the upcoming supreme leader, if there were to be one to be nominated in the coming days, given the current circumstances, will find it very hard to fill his shoes.
Abbas, Israel has said that it doesn't matter who takes over next in Tehran. They're going to be a target that Israel is going to go after. I mean, regardless of international law, how worrying is that?
We have been seeing the wave of attacks coming from the Israeli and American sides have been mostly targeting the civilian infrastructure. And so it seems that there is no, let's say, attention from the American side on this matter, as well as other, global community, including the Western countries. And but in the meantime, we are seeing also from Iranian side that they have been departing from their past, let's say, playbook that they used to target American military bases in the region. But this time, this goes beyond that, and they also have included those facilities used by American forces in the region, or anything which is related to American presence in the regional countries, to make sure that the cost they are paying will be heavier. And this is part of a game which deals with the deterrence matter. So both sides are trying to break the model. The US and Israel want to establish a Lebanon style model toward Iran to come and attack the country now and then. But Iran wants to stop this process. But as we speak, there is a new round of, let's say, efforts by the American and Israeli side to somehow engage and include, let's say, armed groups, separatists and terrorist groups, to intervene and to create a friction for the Iranian government. And early Iranian intelligence ministry said that they have arrested a armed cell in the capital who were about to somehow conduct a terrorist operation. So this is going to be a new challenge or a new phase in the ongoing conflict.
Okay. Wolfgang, obviously, this isn't just about Iran, Israel and the US. By my count, Iran's now fired back on at least 9 countries across the region. We've seen Greek fighter jets in the skies above Cyprus now, European leaders getting involved as well. I mean, how worried are you that this is going to escalate beyond anyone's control?
I would say Iran's leadership, whoever these people might be, has no interest whatsoever to get some additional opponents. They neither have an interest in getting some bombs from Qatar or from the United Arab Emirates, nor to be bombed from UK or from France. So it is not in the Iranian interest to extend the war over the region that is currently affected. I don't expect them to attack military and civilian targets to a larger extent in the Gulf states. I don't expect them to attack and strike targets in the European Union, let alone in a NATO country. This would not make sense for them from a simple point of view. The more countries they have as an enemy, the less likely is their survival. Their strategy has 3 main elements: missile strikes on Israel, attacking American, as you said, facilities and interests in the region, and exert indirect pressure on the US through the Gulf states, through the Europeans and others, but not to drag other countries directly into the war.
OK, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Wolfgang, Abbas and Zaydoun, we do appreciate your time. Well, at least 100 people are missing after an attack on an Iranian ship off the coast of Sri Lanka. That is according to authorities there. Officials say 32 critically wounded sailors have been rescued. Search for the rest of the crew is still ongoing. Now, the frigate issued a distress call in the early hours of Wednesday. It's not yet clear if this attack is part of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Well, Spain's Prime Minister has doubled down on his criticism of the attack on Iran by the US and Israel, warning the conflict risked playing Russian roulette with the lives of millions. Pedro Sanchez was responding to US President Donald Trump's threats to cut trade with Madrid over its position on the conflict. Now, tensions between the 2 NATO allies are on the rise after Sanchez described the bombing of Iran as reckless and illegal. He's also barred US aircraft involved in the operation from using Spanish naval and air bases.
We should learn from history, and we can't play Russian roulette with the destiny of millions of people. The powers involved in this conflict should immediately stop the hostilities and rely on dialogue and diplomacy. And the rest of us should act in a coherent way, defending the same values that we defend when we talk about Ukraine, Gaza, Venezuela and Greenland.
Well, Sonia Gallego joins us now from London, and this is the strongest condemnation yet from a European leader. Obviously, no love lost between Sanchez and Donald Trump.
I think that would be a very fair assessment. The 2 men seem to be diametrically opposed to each other in terms of where their values lie. And of course, Pedro Sanchez made this absolutely explicit in his response to Trump's comments in the White House yesterday, coming down firmly on the side of what he calls international law as well. Those comments that he made were amounted to really some of the strongest yet that we've seen from a European leader. Pedro Sanchez, of course, underlining what he says is the illegality of the military actions there, and that there had to be a return to diplomatic means. This is what Spain wanted to return to, what Spain's focus is on as well. And he stated that one illegality could not be cured by another illegality as well. As he said, that's how great disasters occur. So really quite a full-throated reaction from the Spanish Prime Minister there as well. But there are a couple of strategic issues as well. There is, of course, the issue of the US wanting to use the bases in Spain for its military operations, something which the Spanish government has completely denied. That obviously has really riled President Trump. And it's certainly not going to be the end of his criticism of the Spanish Prime Minister as well, considering that Spain is also has one of the lowest defense budget spendings in NATO as well, something that Trump has been very dismissive.
Targets, American targets, 600 kilometers within the Indian Ocean. So that's a very long distance. Ground forces also say the Revolutionary Guard have launched 3 simultaneous operations. They fired 230 offensive drones at U.S. Israeli targets, American bases in Erbil, northern Iraq, and also U.S. bases in Kuwait, 2 U.S. bases in Kuwait. That's basically what we have for now, and mostly it is in the direction of more defiance, more force shown by Iran in this operation, and no signs of the Iranian military weakening because of due to the strikes by Israel and the United States.
And Mohammed, the morning of Khamenei starts today. There are obviously preparations underway to select Iran's next supreme leader. Can you just talk us through that process and how quickly it's thought that the leadership vacuum could be filled?
Yeah, I have to start with the latest, and that's there was a big gathering, probably millions, that was going to take place today as a farewell to the late supreme leader. And the latest we have is that it has been postponed due to some logistics. That's in the atmospherics of what you have asked about. Ayatollah Mujtaba Hosseini is a member of the Assembly of Experts. He has tweeted or sent some information about what's happening. He said that there is yet no clarity, that there is not yet a decision about how long this process is going to take. But also he said that it is happening as we speak, and there is preparation going on. And as soon as it is finished, then a new supreme leader will be elected. So, I mean, there is this reassurance for the public that continuity is guaranteed, that the country is on its feet, and that it is going to elect a new leadership. No doubt about it.
OK, thank you so much, Mohammed. As always, Mohammed Val for us there in Tehran. As Iran works to pick a new supreme leader, Israel's defense minister says whoever is selected will be a target. On Tuesday, an Israeli strike destroyed a building of the Assembly of Experts in the city of Qom. That's the clerical body tasked with appointing the next supreme leader. Well, Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, posted on X saying every leader appointed by the Iranian terror regime to continue and lead the plan to destroy Israel, to threaten the United States and the free world and the countries of the region, and to suppress the Iranian people will be an unequivocal target for elimination. He went on to say it does not matter what his name is or the place where he hides. Well, Noor O'Day joins us now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. And Noor, can you just talk us through the implications of all this? I mean, the implication there from Israel Katz is saying that it doesn't matter who's going to lead Iran, we're going to hunt you down and eliminate you.
Well, Tom, Israel is framing this war on Iran as the same way it would on a non-state actor, on an armed group in a country. It wants the world to buy into the argument that Iran, a member of the UN, a country of over 90 million people, is equivalent to a so-called terrorist group. And that's why they're talking about hunting down leaders, about not allowing Iran to elect a new supreme leader, about considering all of the leadership to be a threat to the Western world. There's even the use of words like the civilized world, a way to kind of put down Iran and to paint it as the source of evil. Of course, having said that, Israel understands very well that killing leaders is not going to change the picture, but it maintains that only when a friendly Iran, a pro-Israeli Iran is created, or the conditions for it are ripe, will Israel let up in the bombardment. There is an expectation that there would be at least 2 more weeks of Israeli bombardment of Iran. That's according to the latest leaks from the Israeli military circles. And in the meantime, those bombings, according to Israeli estimation, will kind of soften the ground, will prepare the way for a popular uprising against the current government in Tehran. At least that is what the Israeli public is being told will happen in the coming weeks.
And Noor, there's obviously, as we've been discussing, a ramping up of military efforts by Israel into Lebanon. The Defense Minister, Israel Katz, once again, has actually authorized Israeli troops to...
Here's how developers at Perplexity and NVIDIA are prompting AI 10 times faster. You're prompting Cursor over 100 times.
Can you just give us an idea, though, of what the military objective here is? Is it to, I guess, is it still to offer a limited buffer zone north of the blue line, or are we looking really at long-term reoccupation?
Well, it is reoccupation. It is taking over land, because we're talking about 850 square kilometers, Tom. We're talking about going into Lebanese territory, occupying Lebanese territory 25, 30 kilometers deep into Lebanon, clearing it of Lebanese civilians, clearing it even of Lebanese buildings, as we've seen since November 2024, when the agreement with Hezbollah was reached to cease fire. This is part of the evolving Israeli military doctrine, taking other countries' land, clearing it of inhabitants, making the military control of it over it absolute, and then using it as a so-called buffer zone to create a sense of security for Israel. This is extremely unusual, completely outside the parameters of international law, as experts keep reminding us, but it is how Israel is conducting business in Lebanon, in Syria, even inside Gaza. Israel has taken over more than half of the enclave to create a so-called buffer zone, and so far it doesn't seem like it's willing to withdraw.
OK, thank you so much for all of that, Noor O'Day, for us in Ramallah. Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have all been intercepting Iranian drones and missile attacks. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry spokesman says there's been another attempted attack on its Ras Tanura oil refinery. On Monday, a drone strike there caused a fire. Saudi Aramco's Ras Tanura is one of the world's largest oil refineries. We're going to go to Zain Basravi, who's standing by for us in Doha. And yet another day of Gulf nations trying to take stock of more Iranian attacks. Can you just bring us up to date with the latest? Who has been intercepting what from where?
Absolutely. What we're hearing so far is that earlier this morning, the UAE says it intercepted 3 ballistic missiles and 121 drones. That's according to their defense ministry. In Kuwait, the General Staff of the Army announced that the armed forces were dealing earlier this morning with a wave of missiles and drones that had been detected in the airspace headed towards the state of Kuwait. Kuwait, of course, has one of the largest populations of U.S. soldiers in the region, based in bases in Kuwait. They've been there now for decades. In Qatar, the Ministry of Defense said that Qatar was targeted at dawn by 10 drones and 2 cruise missiles from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Ministry of Defense confirming that all were successfully intercepted. In the actions taken against those projectiles coming in involved Qatar's air defenses, Air Force, and Navy. And now in Saudi Arabia, we also understand that there was a drone attack on the refinery, as you said, at Ras Tuna refinery, the largest in the Middle East. Another attack there a couple of days ago rendered it unoperational. It was shut down. And those kinds of attacks on energy infrastructure included on that day an attack on the Ras Laffan liquid natural gas production facility here north of Doha. And earlier today, there was also another attack east of Saudi Arabia, a drone attack there, and 2 ballistic missiles fired at the Al-Khurj region, where the Prince Sultan Air Base is and has hosted U.S. troops routinely throughout the years. So despite the fact that the frequency and volume of attacks by Iran are lessening, these intermittent attacks in the beginning of the day and later on in the afternoon and most likely later this evening, there does seem to be a pattern emerging, but it has to be said the frequency and volume of attacks since the first 2 days of the conflict have gone down.
OK, thank you so much for that update, Zain. Zain Basravi for us in Doha. A growing number of Filipinos in the Middle East are seeking to leave the region as the conflict escalates. People from the Philippines form the backbone of the workforce in many countries, particularly in the Gulf. Now, the Philippine president says teams on the ground are preparing evacuation procedures. Millions of expat workers from the rest of Asia are also in harm's way. Barnaby Lowe has the story from Manila.
Manila's international airport may not be a hub, but it is the gateway for millions of Filipinos who are the lifeblood of the global workforce and the Philippine economy. Their annual remittances account for nearly 10% of the country's GDP. And about a quarter of them are in the Middle East, now caught in the widening conflict there. One of the first expats to be injured by retaliatory strikes by Iran was a Filipino worker in Kuwait's international airport. And one of the first killed was a Filipina caregiver in Israel who was assisting her ward to a bomb shelter when a shrapnel hit her. Now, her family has requested that her remains be brought back home, but officials here say that may not be possible for a while.
In due time, OFW Mary Ann will be home safely. But in the meantime, Admin PY and myself sent our teams already over to Pangasinan and for the family. And then our teams naman also in Tel Aviv are with hand-holding the husband through this difficult process.
In fact, no homecoming is expected at this airport anytime soon, at least from the Middle East. That much Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. admits, while also assuring the nearly 2.5 million Filipinos in the Middle East that there are teams on the ground already getting ready for eventual evacuation of those who've requested to be repatriated, and there is a growing number of them whenever that becomes possible.
Our assessment is that it would be too dangerous to charter flights. There are suggestions to evacuate by land, but that could also be risky because we're talking about an active combat zone. People could be caught in crossfires or cars could be bombed.
And it's not just Filipinos. Across the Middle East, there are more than 24 million migrant workers, many from South and Southeast Asia. And so, for instance, Pakistan, Thailand, and Indonesia have urged their citizens to shelter in place. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has directed all departments to assist Indian nationals. Vietnam and Nepal have suspended the deployment of workers, and here in the Philippines, a limited deployment ban remains in place. Barnaby Lowe, Al Jazeera, Manila.
In Iraq, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it's launched a series of drone attacks targeting a US military base in Erbil. The IRGC says it was part of what it described as 3 simultaneous operations, including strikes on 2 US military bases in Kuwait. Also in Iraq, there's been an attack on the headquarters of the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan. The exiled group is blaming Iran for launching drones at their camp. Iran has designated Kurdish opposition groups as terrorist organisations. Well, Russell Serda joins us now. obviously reported extensively from Iran. Thanks for being back with us, Russell. Can you just first of all explain for people that might not know that region and just how volatile it is with so many different groups involved there? What does this mean? What are the consequences right now?
Look, this is quite a new element in the war. So far we have always heard about IRGC's air forces, launching the missiles or engaging in drone affairs or even aircrafts. But for now, for the first time, hearing that IRGC's ground forces are now involved in cross-border operations. So alongside Iran and Iraqi border, where there are Kurdish militants, armed militants over there. And it has been almost like decades that these Kurdish groups, from time to time, they have been clashing, have been in conflict with the Iranian army and Revolutionary Guards. So why now, that particularly while the country is being that much intensively bombed, why does the IRGC need to conduct an operation at that border? Because the risk assessment in Tehran is that eventually USA and Israel will try to destabilize Iran's borders and then encourage the ethnic insurgencies. I mean, the insurgency through the ethnic minorities in Iran. And so the most volatile region in that equation is the Kurdish area in the western part of the country. And if IRGC does not stop it here, does not prevent it here, then these kind of insurgencies later could spread into the Baluch region in the east of the country, and then the Arabs, and then eventually Azeris. So Iran is such a diversified country, and we are talking about more than half of the population being regarded as the minority. So Kurds, 8 to 9 million Kurds. We are talking about over 4 million Arabs, more than 3 million Baluch, and then more than 25 million Azeris, and then there are Lords and Gords and lots of them. But these are huge ethnic groups. And some of them, they have their own desires of having their own states. So that's why the IRGC believes if this insurgency is not suppressed now, then later it's going to be extremely difficult to control it. And if it's not controlled, definitely that will mean a prolonged civil war.
And if we can just talk a little bit about the power vacuum in Iran at the moment, obviously, since the killing of the supreme leader, working towards electing someone to take over. They can't even at this point, from what we heard from Mohammed in the capital, Tehran, a little earlier, they can't even really mourn his death at this point in time because of the security threat. What do you make of that? And how quickly do they need to make a decision here to ensure some sort of stability, some sort of leadership going forward?
They have to be extremely quick because Ali Khamenei was the builder of the modern-day Iran. On the contrary of the common understanding that people believe it was Ayatollah Khomeini who has built Iran, I will say not that much, to be honest. He was a charismatic, popular leader, but 10 years of his rule, so 8 years in the 10 years were just a war with Iraq, but it was Ali Khamenei who built Iran inch by inch. Any institution that you can imagine today, particularly security apparatuses and key figures that are running Iran, have been appointed or shaped or formed by him. So now he's not there. And the country is in an existential war facing the global empire, the USA, and Israel, and indirectly the whole Western economic and defense industry is now working against Iran. So it's an existential threat for Iran. And while that is happening, so their leader is assassinated, their commanders are assassinated, and it was not just one-time heat. So Americans and Israelis are killing the military and the political elites on a daily basis. So while all that is happening, who is going to be in command of the country while the country is facing the
Finance Corporation as Donald Trump proposed, or some other mechanism. But it's clearly important. This is one of the major things holding back tankers is the lack of insurance, whether affordable insurance or any insurance at all. But the other side is there actually a serious physical risk to shipping? Because I think ship owners have shown already in the Red Sea over the past couple of years that they don't want their vessels in harm's way, and they particularly don't want their mariners, they don't want the sailors being killed and injured.
Looking at the stock markets today, there has been an uptick in the main European indices. The FTSE, the CAC, the DAX, all climbing once again after 2 days of losses. But the sell-off continued in today's session in Asia, with the Nikkei losing 4% and the Hang Seng down some 3%. Stock markets in Dubai and Abu Dhabi also reopened after a 2-day suspension. Let's cross now to Dubai and speak to Manas Krani, geoeconomics editor at the national newspaper. Thanks for being with us, Manas. Let's look at the global picture first of all. European indices trading higher at the moment. What's giving traders confidence once again?
Hi, great to be with you. Look, I think what we're going through is a recalibration of risk and how do you manage that risk. 24 hours ago, these markets were nervous. Overnight in Asia, just look at the South Korean index. The Kospi dropped by nearly 20% in the past 2 sessions. So this is about different geographies, recalibrating exactly what's happening here. To Asia, nearly 80 to 90% of their energy needs flow through the Strait of Hormuz. And as we know, the LNG exports are being blocked off from Qatar. We also know that there's a chokehold on oil and energy flowing through there. So I think Asia's recalibrating on access to energy. Just look at the LNG prices in Europe yesterday, up 50%. LNG prices in Asia are at a 3-year high. What I would say is that this market is kind of grasping for any piece of information that allows it to go slightly more optimistic. Do bear in mind, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State in the United States of America, 24 hours ago said that much worse was to come. Here we are. I think you and I have talked about this before I arrived, which is about the New York Times article that maybe Iranians had reached out to the CIA for some kind of recalibration. I would really emphasize, pause, consider that markets clutch at very small pieces of information. Right now, it's about who is the leadership, who is the next supreme leader in Iran. That is the calculation of risk. Tag.
The price of oil continues to climb. How is that suggestion from President Trump that he could protect tankers through the Strait of Hormuz? How has that been received?
I think it's very important that you consider there's a distance between rhetoric, reality, and implementation of such a proffer. It was on Truth Social. He made it very clear the United States would keep energy flowing to the world. But how exactly do you do that? To proffer insurance is one thing, but really, as a major shipper, are you going to put your ships in the line of potential direct fire? This is certainly lampoons the City of London, Lloyd's, who were the alpha, the gold standard of ensuring all marine traffic through that point. This is about the United States of America. Again, I would emphasize this point, going for dominance. Dominance in terms of reassuring the world, even though we are in the midst of war and terror at the same time. And they're two very, very different things. And that is what these markets are calculating. Right now here in Dubai, I would say most of the Gulf nations were dealing with terror, not outright war. But Trump making those promises is what the market is clutching onto as something that may make a material difference to moving gas, oil, and shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. I would be a little bit more cautious in wrapping my arms around that. Tag.
Manas Krani in Dubai. Time's against us. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Well, let's cast the net wider now and consider the broader economic impact and speak to Pratibha Thakur, Regional Director for the Middle East and Africa at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Thanks very much for being with us today. Do you hold out any hope, Pratibha, that even if this war ends soon, that the global economy could somehow escape without a significant impact?
A very relevant question. Thank you for having me on as well. I would say the narrow Strait of Hormuz is the key focal point of the conflict now. There is very much a narrow path to avoid a major shock, which really critically depends on whether energy flows continue or resume quickly, Gulf shipping normalizes equally quickly, and whether the war damaged infrastructure is restored without prolonged disruption. If exports resume smoothly and quickly and insurance markets settle, I would say the impact will be fairly limited to rather than a full-scale crisis in the world. However, and this is a big however, sustained disruption lasting several weeks means sustained higher fuel, transport costs, renewing global inflationary pressures. And what you will see is perhaps even looking at the reversal of the looser monetary policy we've been witnessing in recent times.
Now, when it comes to oil and gas supplies, this is about more than just safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, isn't it? Because several pieces of infrastructure have been hit in the region. How quickly could they get back up and running, do you think?
A very relevant question. It's extremely complex issues. If facilities were shut down as a precaution like we saw earlier this week with Qatar, partial restoration could take several days and weeks. Any serious damage to specialized systems like pipelines, refineries, or LNG trains could take weeks or months to repair. High cost here as well, keeping energy prices very much elevated even after fighting ends. Shipping will not resume quickly. It takes up to 6 months to return to the normal level.
And when you look into the mid-term, which countries or sectors do you think could be most exposed? Crucially, could it drive energy customers back towards Russia?
Very much so. The most exposed regions are energy importing ones, parts of Europe and Asia, particularly India and China, particularly within the intensive energy imports like chemicals, heavy manufacturing. Regarding Russia, energy markets are pragmatic. If Middle Eastern supply becomes
Пойдемте.
stop the hostilities and rely on dialogue and diplomacy. And the rest of us should act in a coherent way, defending the same values that we defend when we talk about Ukraine, Gaza, Venezuela, and Greenland.
In Washington, senior Trump officials have briefed Congress behind closed doors for a second day, justifying the attacks on Iran. But not everyone is convinced. Democrats want to vote on a war powers resolution. They accuse the president of breaching the Constitution by authorizing attacks on Iran without congressional approval. Patty Culhane reports from Washington.
Leaving a classified briefing by Trump administration officials, one Democratic senator made the startling statement. He thinks this could become a ground war in Iran.
I just want to say I am more fearful than ever after this briefing that we may be putting boots on the ground and that troops from the United States may be necessary to accomplish objectives that the administration seems to have.
That is something the administration has not ruled out, but also admitted they are not positioned to do that right now. When it comes to the reason for the strikes, the Trump administration moved to clarify what U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said just 24 hours before, that Israel was going to strike first with or without the United States, so they felt they had to act. I put that question to Republican senators. Are you concerned when Secretary of State Rubio says that the U.S. was going to attack Iran because Israel was going to first?
No, look, we coordinated very closely with Israel, and the whole point was to attack Iran when they were weakest.
But for Republican Senator Mike Rounds, another new explanation.
There's a whole series of reasons why this was the opportune time to do it, in part because of the manufacturing processes that were going on within Iran, in which they were going to be shortly in a position to overcome our capability to defend against them with the weapon systems that we have available to us.
In the coming days, the Congress is expected to vote on a bill that would order the president to stop all attacks on Iran. Okay, is the War Powers bill going to pass? And if not, what's the point?
I'm not sure. We'll find out when the vote is taken. I think it'll be a close vote. But if nothing else, I think every American deserves to know where their representatives stand on this issue.
A potentially pivotal vote for lawmakers, knowing that come November, many of them will face voters who will have the final say if they agree with where they stand right now. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Capitol Hill.
Oil and gas prices have soared, particularly in Asia and Europe. Shipping through one of the world's most important oil choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, has come to a halt. On Tuesday, Donald Trump announced that the United States will offer naval escorts and political risk insurance for tankers trying to get through. Here's Umi Kulsum Sharif on the knock-on effects of the conflict.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps says the Strait of Hormuz is now closed. Now, this is an important waterway with about 20% of the world's oil consumption passing through this narrow curve. It's used by most of the major oil and gas producers in the Middle East. Well, the Strait of Hormuz is rather narrow but holds a lot of traffic. If we look at just this narrow point, it's about 33 kilometers, but an estimated 20 million barrels of oil have flowed through it every single day last year. Now, much of it is headed to Asia through the Arabian Sea, but some of it is also headed to Europe, right through the Arabian Sea and up through the Suez Canal. Its closure would mean 19 billion barrels of oil will be wiped off the global market. Now, Iran has been targeting energy infrastructure right across the region. It sent global oil and gas prices soaring. In its latest attack, it has hit an oil tank in a port in Oman. A drone struck it, but no casualties have been reported. Iran is also targeting Israel, and the Israeli military has reported interceptions in Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem, and El Beit. Israel, for its part, is targeting Tehran and Beirut. And overnight, the Israeli military has deployed additional forces to southern Lebanon.
Key shipping hubs in Asia are expected to face severe port congestion as the conflict in the Middle East intensifies. Hubs like Singapore are managing an overflow as vessels reroute around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. And that's driving up shipping costs, as Patrick Fock reports from Singapore.
Now, the sight of lots of ships anchored here is common, but bottlenecks are beginning to build up around Singapore as shipping lines are requesting to stage Middle East-bound containers here. The increase in traffic is expected to cause significant delays, with some reports suggesting that waiting times for shipping berths could rise to as long as 7 days. Upended travel schedules is also causing what's known in the industry as vessel bunching, which reduces terminal efficiency and leads to higher costs. Now, we have seen similar sorts of situations before. Houthi attacks on US and Israeli flagged vessels in the Red Sea that began in 2023 caused similar disruptions and drove global shipping rates higher. But concerns over prolonged conflict could have a much bigger impact. The cost of hiring a supertanker to ship oil from the Middle East to China right now has risen to an all-time high of more than $400,000 a day. Marine insurers are also cancelling coverage for some vessels, forcing operators to seek policies at much higher premiums. This can add hundreds of thousands of dollars to a single voyage. All of this is expected to increase inflationary pressures worldwide as higher freight rates and insurance costs are passed down the supply chain. It also poses significant energy security risks for many East Asian countries that are heavily reliant on Middle Eastern crude. Analysts are warned that if the conflict spreads, maritime choke points could become more volatile, prolonging disruptions into the second half of this year. For key ports like Singapore, the challenge is maintaining efficiency and resilience in these uncertain times. Patrick Fock, Al Jazeera, Singapore.
A great number of Filipinos in the Middle East are seeking to leave the region as the conflict escalates. People from the Philippines form the backbone of the workforce in many countries, particularly in the Gulf. Millions of migrant workers from the rest of Asia are also in harm's way. Barnaby Lowe has more from Manila.
Manila's international airport may not be a hub, but it is the gateway for millions of Filipinos who are the lifeblood of the global workforce and the Philippine economy. Their annual remittances account for nearly 10% of the country's GDP. And about a quarter of them are in the Middle East, now caught in the widening conflict there. One of the first expats to be injured by retaliatory strikes by Iran was a Filipino worker in Kuwait's international airport, and one of the first killed was a Filipina caregiver in Israel who was assisting her ward to a bomb shelter when a shrapnel hit her. Now, her family has requested that her remains be brought back home, but officials here say that may not be possible for a while.
In due time, OFW Mary Ann will be home safely. But in the meantime, Admin PY and myself sent our teams already over to Pangasinan.
Filmora gives you the freedom to immerse fully in your craft. Sub-projects. Dual timeline editing. Source and timeline preview editing. This is Wondershare Filmora. Powered by AI. Edit as an expert.
Process.
In fact, no homecoming is expected at this airport anytime soon, at least from the Middle East. That much Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. admits, while also assuring the nearly 2.5 million Filipinos in the Middle East that there are teams on the ground already getting ready for eventual evacuation of those who've requested to be repatriated, and there is a growing number of them whenever that becomes possible.
Our assessment is that it would be too dangerous to charter flights. There are suggestions to evacuate by land, but that could also be risky because we're talking about an active combat zone. People could be caught in crossfires, or cars could be bombed.
And it's not just Filipinos. Across the Middle East, there are more than 24 million migrant workers, many from South and Southeast Asia. And so, for instance, Pakistan, Thailand, and Indonesia have urged their citizens to shelter in place. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a limited deployment ban remains in place. Barnaby Low, Al Jazeera, Manila.
As we have been reporting, key shipping hubs are expected to face severe port congestion as the conflict in the Middle East intensifies. That's driving up shipping costs. Neil Roberts is the head of Marine at Lloyd's Market Association, and he joins us now live from London. Thank you so much for joining us, Neil. But give us a sense of how much these insurance costs have actually ballooned.
I wouldn't say that's completely true. That's a story that's in the press. Yes, insurance costs have proportionately increased to reflect the risk.
So that also brings me to the other question, which is Donald Trump announced that the US would be offering political risk insurance for tankers trying to get through the Straits of Hormuz. How would that actually work, and is it feasible?
We haven't got any details about that, to be honest. We're not quite sure that it is political risk insurance that's being offered, although that's how it's described. But we are trying to find some details from the US administration.
So how would it work? I mean, would they have to come to you at Lloyd's Insurance in the end, or would they have to go to a reinsurer?
Well, the tweet suggested, or the information we have so far, is it's a state-backed scheme for owners to apply for cover from, and whether there'll be a London market participation is to be established.
So how is this whole conflict affecting you in the insurance markets?
It's what the London market is set up to deal with. It's obviously a dynamic and evolving situation. The cover remains in place. People are reassessing their exposures and repricing as they go along. But basically, the service that owners expect, which is coverage in a difficult area, is available. And it's down to the charterers and traders as to whether they wish to try and go in or come out.
And what are the actuaries saying here about the conflict?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything from them.
OK, Neil, thank you very much indeed for that. Neil Roberts is the head of Marine at Lloyd's Market Association. All right, we've also got Pakistani nationals arriving back home after being evacuated from Iran by their government. Stranded passengers arrived at a bus station in Quetta. More than 790 people, including some students, have returned to Pakistan through the Taftan border crossing. They describe what they experienced inside of Iran.
The first attack was around 10:15 a.m. 3 missiles were fired and the sound was very loud. After that, the system responded and missiles started firing from the Iranian side as well.
People are saying Tehran is being evacuated, but it's not true. People are out on the streets showing their love for the leader. We were there too, enjoying the atmosphere, but the embassy staff forced us to leave.
In other news, Afghan authorities say more than 8,000 people have been forced from their homes following a series of cross-border attacks by Pakistan. Islamabad launched airstrikes on Kabul and Afghan military positions in several provinces last week. The Pakistani government in Islamabad accuses Kabul of harboring a group called the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and allowing it to stage cross-border attacks. Kabul says 110 civilians have been killed since the fighting began.
Political efforts are ongoing, and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan seeks to resolve the issue through diplomatic channels. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan has held telephone conversations with the foreign ministers of various countries, clearly outlining Afghanistan's position and policy. It has been emphasized that Afghanistan did not initiate the war, but is engaged in a defensive conflict.
That's it from me, Rashad Salamat, at least for now. A reminder, of course, that you can keep up to date with all the news by simply visiting our website, aljazeera.com. We'll have continued coverage of the conflict between US, Israel and Iran right after Inside Story.
Iran attacks Gulf Arab states, hitting civilian buildings and energy infrastructure, as well as U.S. bases. The impact of the American-Israeli strikes on the Islamic Republic is felt across the region. What does this mean for Gulf states' relations with Iran and with the U.S.? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. In the days since the U.S. and Israel began a joint military operation against Iran, the Islamic Republic has launched missiles and drones at Gulf Arab nations. Countries hosting U.S. bases have been in the line of fire, but civilian infrastructure has been hit too. Relations between Iran and Gulf states have varied since the Islamic Republic was born of the 1979 revolution. Some, such as Qatar and Oman, have enjoyed friendly ties, others less so. But all are under severe strain now, in the midst of events barely imaginable a week ago. Gulf countries pushed hard for a diplomatic solution from the nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran, a process shattered by U.S. and Israeli bombs on Saturday. So why has Iran decided to attack its neighbors? What are the implications for the region and for relations between Gulf states and Iran? And what about Gulf nations' alliances with the U.S.? We'll speak to our guest shortly, but first, this report from Perry Wilton.
Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, all targeted by Iran. In an address to the United Nations, the Gulf Cooperation Council condemned the strikes.
These attacks come at a time when mediation and de-escalation efforts are intensifying in Arab countries, prioritizing political solutions and dialogue. This escalation is therefore unjustified and undermines efforts to establish security and stability.
Terrorizing and targeting civilians in countries seeking peace is an abhorrent crime. This attack constitutes a flagrant violation and an unacceptable act in every respect.
Iran says it's targeting U.S. assets in response to the joint offensive by Israel and the U.S. that began on Saturday. All the countries hit house American military facilities. But Iran also struck energy infrastructure in Qatar, residential buildings in Bahrain, the Kuwaiti airport, and hotels in the UAE were also struck. Millions of foreign workers live in the Gulf, and the countries have long been considered safe havens in the Middle East, not least due to the US military presence. But now schools and businesses are closed. Flights are disrupted and people are leaving. The conflict has caused energy prices to soar. Strikes in Qatar and Saudi Arabia shut down gas and oil production. And Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Around 20% of global energy supplies passes through the narrow waterway. Qatar has had good relations with Iran in the past. They share the world's largest natural gas field. In a post on social media, former Prime Minister Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabbar Al Thani said Qatar must not be dragged into a direct confrontation with Iran because it will deplete both countries' resources and give what he called many forces an opportunity to control us under the pretext of helping us. For every day the strikes continue, the costs are rising, both regionally and globally. Perry Wilton, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. From Riyadh, we're joined by Abdulaziz Al-Ghashian, a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. Badr Saif is a professor at Kuwait University, specializing in Middle East history and politics. He joins us from Kuwait City. And Fouad Izzadi is in the Iranian capital. He's a professor in the Faculty of World Studies at the University of Tehran. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Abdulaziz, let me start with you today. Gulf states have urged moderation throughout in the run-up to this current crisis, and they urged a diplomatic solution in the talks between the U.S. and Iran, which were brokered, of course, by Oman. Has that strategy been affected by these attacks, and could it change?
Well, firstly, Mohammed, thank you very much for having me, and Ramadan Kareem. I think, unfortunately, we have entered into a juncture, in post this war. I think right now the process of the era of rapprochement, in my opinion, is dwindling, and we're entering into an era where I think it's going to be a very frosty position. In my opinion, I think the Saudi Arabia and other GCC states have invested a great deal of effort in diplomacy and rapprochement and de-escalation for the sake of trying to really share the region and share, I think, the prosperity in the region and create a calm and stable region. But I think the actions and the retaliations by, I think, the Iran regime now towards the Gulf against the backdrop of an immense amount of lobbying and effort for Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries to actually avoid this effort. They stood against this effort. And for them only to be attacked. They have given assurances time and again. And even in the recent statements, you could tell how outraged the Saudi officials are by calling these attacks cowardly. So I think, in my opinion, we've definitely entered into a post-rapprochement era. I won't say that diplomacy is over, but I think we're going to have a different mode of diplomacy, one that's about more robust posturing until we try to figure this out. I think it's going to be some time, and I hope I'm wrong.
Fuad, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he says Tehran doesn't want to escalate tensions with countries in the region. He also added, "We are not fighting our neighboring countries. We're fighting American forces that are based in these countries." But how is that the case when Iran is now targeting the Gulf region's energy assets and energy infrastructure? And why has Iran decided to attack its neighbors in this way?
You know, Iran is facing very difficult times. The idea that a lot of people in Iran share is that the aim of the United States is to disintegrate Iran as a country, to balkanize Iran. They want to finish Iran, in their minds at least, and in practice if they can, so they can dominate the region. That's the ultimate goal of Netanyahu and Trump. Netanyahu has been able to use American soldiers to achieve what he has been wanting to achieve for many years, which is going to war with Iran using American resources. I'm sure he would want to do the same with the resources of other countries in this part of the world. We have had American reporters, Tucker Carlson, reporting that both Saudi Arabia and Qatar have arrested Mossad agents trying to blow up things in these countries and blame Iran for it. Iran, as our brothers